The distress beacon screamed across the void with the desperation of a dying civilization. Ambassador Zephyr of the Galactic Harmony Council pressed his six-fingered hands against the communication console, his blue-scaled face twisted in anguish as he watched the holographic display showing his homeworld under siege. "Send the emergency signal to all available Council forces," Zephyr commanded his aide, a nervous Rex named Klicken whose antennae twitched with anxiety. "The Korath Imperium has broken the peace treaty. They're using forbidden plasma weapons against civilian populations." Klicken's mandibles clicked rapidly as he worked the controls. "Sir, our nearest fleet won't arrive for 6 rotations. The orbital defense platforms are already failing. The casualties." "I know." Zephyr slammed his fist against the metal surface. "Just send the signal. Mark it as Code Crimson, total planetary emergency requiring immediate intervention from any allied forces within range." The communication array hummed to life, broadcasting the plea for help across dozens of star systems. The message was simple but desperate: coordinates of the attack, enemy force strength, and a plea for immediate military assistance to prevent genocide. What neither Zephyr nor Klicken realized was that their communication protocols had been updated 3 cycles ago to include a new species that had recently joined the galactic community. A species from a small blue world in a backwater system called Sol. The humans had been admitted to the Council only after extensive debate. Most civilized species evolved on garden worlds with stable climates, predictable weather, and relatively gentle gravitational forces. Humans came from what the Council classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, a planet so hostile that simply surviving there required adaptations that would be considered extreme by galactic standards. Earth's gravity was nearly twice what most spacefaring species considered normal. Its weather patterns were chaotic and violent. The planet experienced regular ice ages, massive storms, seismic activity, and had been struck by extinction-level asteroids multiple times. Most Council members couldn't understand how any intelligent species could possibly evolve in such conditions. But evolve they had, and, when first contact was made, the humans had impressed the Council with their technological advancement and diplomatic skills. They seemed peaceful enough, despite their alarming physical capabilities and their history of constant warfare with their own species. The emergency signal reached the human patrol vessel UNS Determination as it conducted routine surveys near the edge of human space. Captain Sarah Chen, a veteran of the recent Jovian mining conflicts, was reviewing stellar cartography data when her communications officer, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, straightened at his station. "Captain, we're receiving a Code Crimson distress call from the Galactic Council," Webb reported, his voice tense with concern. "Coordinates are approximately 4 light hours from our current position." Chen frowned. The humans had been members of the Council for less than a standard year. They'd attended diplomatic functions and established trade relationships, but they'd never been called upon for military assistance. "What's the nature of the emergency?" "Planetary assault by hostile forces. Civilian populations under attack. They're requesting immediate military intervention from any allied forces in range." Webb paused, double-checking his readings. "Ma'am, according to this, we're the closest Council vessel to respond." The captain stood from her command chair, her mind racing through the implications. The Determination was just a light cruiser with a crew of 300, equipped for patrol duties and minor conflicts. But the desperation in the alien transmission was unmistakable, even filtered through universal translators. "Set course for those coordinates, maximum burn," Chen ordered. "And send a priority message to Fleet Command. Inform them we're responding to a Council emergency and request immediate backup." "Aye, Captain." The navigation officer's fingers danced across his controls as the ship's engines roared to life. "ETA to target coordinates, 3 hours, 47 minutes. As the Determination raced through space toward the crisis, Captain Chen couldn't know that her decision to respond would trigger the largest human military mobilization since the Great War. The message to Fleet Command sparked a chain reaction that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to call upon the children of a Deathworld. Admiral James Harrison was in his office at Luna Base, reviewing patrol schedules and supply requisitions, when the priority alert flashed across his screens. He read Captain Chen's report twice before reaching for his secure communication device. "Get me General Rodriguez at Mars Command and Admiral Okafor at the Titan shipyards," Harrison barked at his aide. "Priority Alpha clearance." Within minutes, the 3 highest-ranking military officials in human space were linked in a secure conference call.
General Rodriguez's weathered face appeared on the left screen while Admiral Okafor's calm demeanor filled the right.
Gentlemen, we have a situation, Harrison began without preamble.
One of our ships has responded to a Galactic Council emergency.
Planetary assault against civilian populations.
Our first real test as council members.
Rodriguez leaned forward.
What kind of force are we dealing with?
Unknown, but significant enough to overwhelm planetary defenses. The important thing is this: if we're going to establish our credibility in the galactic community, we need to respond appropriately.
Admiral Okafor nodded slowly.
The Council species have always viewed us as primitives from a savage world. They tolerated our membership because our technology impressed them, but I suspect many still see us as barely civilized barbarians.
Exactly my thinking, Harrison agreed. This is our chance to prove that humanity stands by its allies. I'm proposing we deploy the Third Fleet.
The silence that followed was profound. The Third Fleet was humanity's most advanced military formation: 12 heavy cruisers, 6 battleships, 2 fleet carriers, and nearly 100 support vessels. It was a force capable of conquering entire star systems. Rodriguez was the first to speak. That's a significant commitment, Admiral.
Are you sure a single patrol cruiser can't handle whatever's out there?
I'm not sending the Third Fleet to handle the crisis, Harrison replied with a thin smile.
I'm sending it to make a statement.
For too long, the other Council species have dismissed us as insignificant newcomers. They need to understand that when humanity commits to something, we commit completely.
Admiral Okafor's expression was thoughtful. The logistics alone will be impressive. How quickly can we deploy? 6 hours for the advance elements, 12 hours for the full fleet, Rodriguez calculated. Though that assumes we mobilize every available ship and crew. Do it, Harrison decided.
And broadcast our deployment on all Council frequencies. Let them know that when someone calls for help, humanity answers in force. As the 3 admirals coordinated the largest human fleet movement in history, none of them fully understood how their decision would be perceived by the alien civilizations who had never seen a Deathworld species commit to battle. Back on the bridge of the Determination, Captain Chen received an encrypted message that made her stare at the screen in disbelief.
Ma'am?
Lieutenant Webb noticed her expression.
Everything all right? Chen blinked and refocused on her crew. Change of plans, Lieutenant. We're no longer responding alone. Fleet Command is dispatching the entire Third Fleet as backup.
The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's engines.
Everyone understood the implications.
The Third Fleet was the pride of human space, a force that had never been deployed in its entirety outside of major training exercises.
The entire Third Fleet?
Webb's voice cracked slightly.
Ma'am, that's nearly 200 ships. Yes, it is.
Chen settled back into her command chair, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders.
Apparently, when the Galactic Council calls for help, humanity doesn't send a single ship. We send everything. As the Determination continued its race toward the embattled alien world, subspace communications across human space crackled with emergency mobilization orders. Space docks that had been quiet moments before exploded into activity as crews rushed to their ships. Vessels that had been undergoing routine maintenance were cleared for immediate departure. Supply ships loaded ammunition and provisions at record speed. What had begun as a simple distress call was about to become the galactic community's first real glimpse of what humans considered an appropriate military response. The children of Earth were coming to war, and they were bringing everything they had. On the alien world of Kepler Prime, Ambassador Zephyr watched in growing horror as Karath battlecruisers rained destruction upon the capital city's outer districts. The planetary shields had failed an hour ago, and the orbital defense platforms were nothing but expanding clouds of debris. Any response to our distress call? He asked Klicken, though he already knew the answer from his aide's dejected posture. Nothing yet, Ambassador. The nearest Council fleet is still 5 rotations out.
Zephyr closed his eyes and tried not to think about the millions of civilians who would be dead by the time help arrived. The Karath Imperium had violated every treaty, every law of civilized warfare. They were targeting hospitals, schools, residential areas, anything that would maximize civilian casualties and force a quick surrender.
Sir!
Klicken's voice suddenly carried a note of excitement.
I'm detecting an approaching vessel.
Small, but moving at incredible speed. Zephyr's eyes snapped open.
Council forces?
The ship's configuration is unusual.
I'm not familiar with this design.
But they're broadcasting Council identification codes and wait.
Klicken's antennae twitched rapidly as he processed the incoming data. They're from the human world. Earth. For a moment, Zephyr felt his hopes deflate.
He'd met humans at council gatherings, strange, short-lived creatures from a savage world who somehow managed to build impressive technology. They were physically intimidating by galactic standards, but they were newcomers with no military reputation beyond their own primitive conflicts.
How many ships? Zephyr asked, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice.
Just one, sir. A light cruiser by the mass readings.
One ship. One human ship against a Koroth battle fleet of 40 vessels.
Zephyr slumped in his chair, watching the destruction continue to rain down on his homeworld.
The humans had responded to the call for help, but what could a single ship possibly accomplish?
He was about to find out that when dealing with a species from a Deathworld, the question wasn't what one ship could accomplish, it was what one ship could survive long enough to accomplish. And, in 43 minutes, when the rest of the human response arrived, the galaxy would learn why you never fight fair against someone who evolved in hell. The UNS Determination dropped out of hyperspace like an avenging angel, its sleek hull gleaming under the light of Kepler Prime's dying star. Captain Chen stood on the bridge, her jaw clenched as she surveyed the tactical display showing the ongoing massacre below.
Tactical assessment, Commander Martinez, she ordered her weapons officer. Commander Elena Martinez's fingers flew over her console as she analyzed the enemy fleet.
43 Koroth vessels, Captain. Mix of heavy cruisers and battleships.
They're using banned plasma bombardment weapons against population centers. No attempt to minimize civilian casualties. Chen's eyes hardened.
The Galactic Council's rules of engagement were clear about protecting non-combatants, but the Koroth Imperium had apparently decided those rules no longer apply to them.
Ship status? All systems green. Weapons charged and ready. Point defense systems online.
We've got full magazines for both kinetic and energy weapons, Martinez reported with grim satisfaction.
Lieutenant Webb looked up from his communications station. Captain, I'm receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It's Ambassador Zephyr of the Harmony Council. Put him through.
The main screen flickered to show the blue-scale alien ambassador, his formal diplomatic robes singed and torn, standing in what appeared to be a damaged emergency shelter. Behind him, other alien civilians huddled together, their various species united in terror. Human vessel, I am grateful for your response to our distress call, Zephyr began, his voice carrying the weight of desperation.
But, I must warn you, the Koroth fleet is massive.
Perhaps you should maintain your distance and wait for larger council forces to arrive. Chen stepped forward, her voice steady and calm.
Ambassador, I appreciate your concern. But, humanity doesn't retreat from bullies. We're going to stop this attack. Zephyr's expression was a mix of admiration and pity.
Captain, your courage is commendable, but you are outnumbered 43-1.
This is not a battle you can win. With respect, Ambassador, you don't know humans very well. Chen nodded to her communications officer.
Send this message to the Koroth fleet commander on all frequencies. The bridge crew straightened as their captain's voice took on the cold tone they recognized from combat situations.
Koroth vessels, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Nations Starship Determination.
You are in violation of Galactic Council Resolution 847 regarding the protection of civilian populations during military operations.
Cease your bombardment immediately and withdraw from this system.
The response came within moments, a deep, guttural laugh from the Koroth fleet commander. His reptilian features filled the screen, scarred and battle-hardened, with the cold yellow eyes of a predator.
Little human, your species is new to the galaxy.
Perhaps you do not understand how war is conducted among real warriors. I am Admiral Scarex of the Koroth Imperium, and I have conquered 14 worlds. Turn your tiny ship around and flee, before I add you to my collection of defeated enemies.
Chen's smile was razor-thin and completely without warmth. Admiral Scarex, I'm afraid you've made 3 critical errors in judgment. Scarex's eyes narrowed. And what might those be, mammal?
First, you assumed that because humanity is new to the galactic community, we're weak.
Second, you assumed that because we're outnumbered, we're helpless. Chen paused, her gaze never wavering from the alien commanders. And, third, you assumed you're only fighting one ship. The Korath admiral's expression shifted from amusement to confusion. What are you talking about, human?
Our sensors detect only your vessel. Then, your sensors need recalibration, Chen replied.
Mr. Webb, patch me through to Admiral Harrison. The screen split to show Admiral Harrison's stern face from the bridge of the UNS Sovereign, the flagship of the Third Fleet.
Behind him, the organized chaos of a fleet command center was visible, with dozens of officers coordinating the largest human military operation in their short galactic history.
Admiral, Chen said formally. Requesting permission to engage hostile forces in defense of Council civilians.
Harrison's voice carried across space with the authority of someone who had spent decades protecting human interests. Permission granted, Captain.
You have 47 ships of the Third Fleet backing you up. Light 'em up. The effect on Admiral Scarex was immediate and profound.
The confident Predator's expression melted into one of shock and growing panic.
47 ships? That's impossible.
Our long-range sensors show no other vessels.
Martinez looked up from her tactical station with a predatory grin. Captain, the fleet is decloaking on your command. Chen nodded once. Do it.
Space around Kepler Prime suddenly blazed with new stars as 47 human warships shimmered into existence. The Third Fleet had approached using advanced stealth technology that rendered them invisible to conventional sensors, technology developed during humanity's brutal conflicts in their own solar system. The human fleet formation was a thing of beauty and terror. Heavy cruisers formed the outer perimeter, their hulls bristling with railguns and missile pods. Battleships anchored the center, their massive frames housing enough firepower to crack continents. Fleet carriers hung in protected positions, their fighter bays already launching swarms of combat craft.
On the planet's surface, Ambassador Zephyr stared at his displays in absolute shock.
His species' military doctrine was based on careful positioning, methodical advancement, and overwhelming firepower applied gradually. What he was witnessing defied every principle of civilized warfare.
How did they get so many ships here so quickly?
Clicken whispered, his voice filled with awe.
Zephyr could only shake his head.
The humans had been council members for less than one standard year, yet they had mobilized a fleet that rivaled anything the council's major powers could deploy. And they had done it in response to a single distress call from an ally they barely knew.
Aboard the Korath flagship, Admiral Scarex was dealing with his own crisis of understanding.
His tactical officers were shouting reports that seemed impossible to believe. Sir, the human vessels are using some form of stealth technology we've never encountered. Their ship designs are completely unknown.
Nothing in our tactical databases.
Admiral, they're moving into attack formation with coordinated precision that suggests extensive combat experience.
Scarex's mind raced as he tried to process what he was seeing.
The humans were supposed to be a minor species from a backwater world.
Their planet was so hostile that most galactic civilizations couldn't understand how intelligent life had evolved there at all.
But, as he watched the human fleet maneuver with the fluid grace of veteran warriors, a terrible understanding began to dawn on him. These weren't the peaceful explorers and diplomatic newcomers that the Council had described. These were apex predators, evolved in the crucible of a death world, hardened by constant warfare among their own kind. Captain Chen's voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. Admiral Scarex, you now have 30 seconds to withdraw your forces from this system. Continue your attack on civilians, and we will demonstrate why Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Scarex felt genuine fear. He had heard whispers about death worlds, planets so hostile that they produced species with capabilities that seemed almost supernatural by civilized standards. He had always assumed those stories were exaggerated. Looking at the human fleet's perfect formation and the cold efficiency with which they had appeared from nowhere, he was beginning to realize that the stories might not have been exaggerated enough. All ships, prepare for immediate withdrawal, Scarex ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. But, his subordinates, drunk on their earlier victories, were not ready to retreat from what they still perceived as inferior opponents. Admiral, we outnumber them, his tactical officer protested. 43 ships against 48.
The odds are nearly even.
Scarex turned to stare at his officer with a mixture of pity and terror. You fool! We're not fighting 48 ships. We're fighting 48 ships crewed by Deathworlders. On the bridge of the Determination, Captain Chen watched the Korath fleet's hesitation with grim satisfaction. She had seen this before during conflicts in the outer colonies, the moment when enemies realized they were facing humans in combat and, suddenly, understood that numerical superiority meant very little.
"Captain," Martinez reported, "Korath forces are not withdrawing.
Several of their ships are actually moving into more aggressive positions."
Chen's expression didn't change. "Then, we teach them why you don't threaten civilians when Deathworlders are watching." She opened a channel to the entire human fleet. "All ships, this is Captain Chen. Weapons free. Target priority is any vessel continuing bombardment operations. Show them what happens when you call for help and humans answer." What followed would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. The Battle of Kepler Prime lasted exactly 14 minutes and 37 seconds from first shot to final Korath surrender. The human fleet didn't fight like any civilized military force in recorded galactic history. They fought like a pack of cooperative predators, each ship covering others while maintaining devastating coordinated fire. Their tactics were aggressive to the point of seeming suicidal, yet executed with precision that spoke of extensive combat experience. Korath vessels that had seemed invincible moments before found themselves overwhelmed by human strategies that prioritized speed, surprise, and absolutely ruthless efficiency. The humans used weapons and tactics that no civilized species had ever developed, because no civilized species had evolved on a world that required such adaptations for survival. When the smoke cleared, 31 Korath ships were floating dead in space, their crews either captured or dead. The remaining 12 had surrendered after Admiral Skarax himself was killed when he tried to ram his flagship into a human battleship, an act of desperation that succeeded only in demonstrating the superior armor and defensive systems of human military technology. On the planet's surface, the bombardment had stopped. The human fleet had saved Kepler Prime, but, more importantly, they had announced to the galaxy that a new power had emerged from the depths of space, one that would not tolerate threats to innocent life. The aftermath of the Battle of Kepler Prime sent shockwaves across the galaxy that traveled faster than the human fleet had arrived. Within hours, emergency sessions were being called in the halls of the Galactic Council, while news networks struggled to comprehend what they were reporting. Ambassador Zephyr stood in the ruins of his embassy, watching through the shattered windows as human shuttles descended from the fleet above. The contrast between the sleek, efficient vessels and the smoking crater that had once been the Korath bombardment zone was stark and telling. Ambassador Klicken approached with a datapad, his antennae still trembling from the recent trauma. "The human fleet commander is requesting permission to land relief supplies and medical teams." Zephyr nodded absently, his mind still reeling from what he had witnessed. In 14 minutes, the humans had accomplished what the combined council forces would have taken days to achieve, if they could have managed it at all. "Grant them full access," he replied. "And, Klicken? Send a priority message to the council. They need to understand what just happened here." As the first human relief shuttle touched down in the embassy courtyard, Zephyr got his first close look at the species that had just saved his world. The humans who emerged were not the diplomatic, carefully controlled individuals he had met at council functions. These were soldiers, medics, and engineers, and their physical presence was intimidating in ways that formal meetings had never conveyed. Captain Chen stepped down from the lead shuttle, followed by a team of Marines whose casual readiness spoke of constant preparation for violence. Each human stood nearly 2 meters tall, their dense bone structure and obvious muscle mass marking them as products of their death world's brutal gravity. Ambassador Zephyr, Chen approached with a slight bow of respect. "Captain Sarah Chan, UNS Determination. We're here to provide assistance and assess the situation." Zephyr found himself studying the human captain more carefully than he ever had before. Chen moved with the fluid grace of a predator, her alert eyes constantly scanning for threats. Even in this moment of victory, she remained ready for combat. "Captain Chen, we are grateful beyond words," Zephyr managed. "But, I must ask, how did your people respond so quickly? Our emergency call was broadcast less than 6 hours ago." Chen's expression was matter of fact. "When civilians are under attack, Ambassador, humans don't hesitate. My ship responded immediately, and Fleet Command mobilized everything they could to support us." "Everything?" Zephyr's voice carried a note of disbelief. "You deployed nearly 50 warships for one emergency call from an ally you've known for less than a year?" The human captain's slight smile was both warming and terrifying. "Ambassador, humanity learned long ago that freedom isn't free. When someone calls for help against oppression, we answer with whatever it takes.
As Chen spoke, her Marines were already spreading out to secure the area and establish communications with local emergency services. The efficiency was breathtaking. Within minutes, they had transformed the chaotic disaster zone into an organized relief operation. Meanwhile, in the vast chambers of the Galactic Council headquarters on Centauri Station, an emergency session was underway that would reshape interstellar politics for generations to come. Councillor Vexstar of the Hegemony World stood at the central podium, his crystalline carapace reflecting the chamber's lights as he addressed the assembled representatives of 47 different species. Fellow councillors, Vexstar's voice resonated through the translation systems. We are gathered to discuss the unprecedented events at Kepler Prime. The human response to our emergency protocols has raised significant questions about our understanding of this newest member species.
Murmurs rippled through the chamber as representatives consulted their data tablets.
The tactical reports from the battle were still being analyzed, but the raw numbers were staggering. Councillor Thrain of the Ethereal Collective, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, pulsed with concerned colors. The humans mobilized their largest fleet formation in response to a single distress call.
Their military capabilities exceed our initial assessments by orders of magnitude.
More troubling, interjected Councillor Mordak of the Trade Federation, is their combat methodology. Our military analysts report that human tactics demonstrate extensive experience with asymmetric warfare, fleet coordination, and what can only be described as organized violence on a scale unprecedented among civilized species.
The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in.
Most council species had evolved beyond warfare millennia ago, maintaining only token defensive forces. The idea of a civilization that not only retained massive military capabilities but could deploy them with such speed and efficiency was deeply unsettling. Councillor Yerix of the Peaceful Worlds Alliance, whose people had not engaged in warfare for over 3,000 years, spoke with barely concealed fear.
Are we to understand that we have admitted a warrior species to our council? A people whose first instinct when called for help is to deploy overwhelming military force?
The humans saved an entire world and millions of lives, pointed out Councillor Flem of the Scientific Coalition. Their actions were in defense of a council member against an aggressor that had violated every treaty regarding civilian protection.
But, at what cost to galactic stability? Yerix countered. Today they deployed their fleet against the Korath. Tomorrow, what happens when humanity decides that some other species' actions require their intervention?
The debate that followed would rage for hours, but the fundamental question was already clear. The galaxy had welcomed what they thought was a minor species from a primitive world, only to discover they had admitted a military superpower that could project force faster and more effectively than any civilization in recorded history. Back on Kepler Prime, the human relief operation was proceeding with the same devastating efficiency that had characterized their military response.
Medical teams were treating alien wounded with portable equipment that surpassed anything in the Council's medical databases.
Engineering teams were restoring power and communications using techniques that seemed to involve rebuilding entire systems from scratch in a matter of hours. Ambassador Zephyr found himself in the unusual position of observing a species whose civilian capabilities seemed as advanced as their military ones. The humans weren't just warriors, they were problem solvers whose entire culture appeared to be built around responding to crises with overwhelming competence.
Ambassador, a new voice called out.
Zephyr turned to see Admiral Harrison himself approaching, having shuttled down from the fleet flagship. The human admiral was older than the others, his gray hair and weathered features speaking of decades of command experience.
Admiral Harrison, Zephyr bowed formally. I am honored by your presence.
The honor is mine, Ambassador, Harrison replied. I wanted to personally ensure that your people receive everything they need to recover from this attack. As they spoke, Zephyr found himself studying this senior human leader. Harrison moved with the same casual readiness as the others, but there was something else, a depth of experience that suggested involvement in conflicts far more complex than the recent battle.
Admiral, may I ask a question that has been troubling me?
Zephyr ventured. Of course. Your species' military response was extraordinary. The speed, the scale, the coordination. This level of capability suggests extensive combat experience. But, according to our records, humanity has been largely isolated in your home system until recently.
Harrison's expression grew thoughtful. Ambassador, I think you may not fully understand what it means to evolve on a death world.
Earth didn't just make us physically strong, it made us competitive, adaptive, and, unfortunately, very good at warfare.
You fought among yourselves? For most of our recorded history, Harrison admitted without shame. Wars over resources, territory, ideology, religion. By the time we developed space travel, we had already perfected the art of organized conflict. The galaxy's longest period of peace lasted longer than our entire recorded history. The implications hit Zephyr like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't developed their military capabilities for defense against external threats, they had evolved them through millennia of conflict among their own species. They were a civilization of warriors who had only recently stopped fighting each other long enough to notice the rest of the galaxy.
But, you've moved beyond that now?
Zephyr asked hopefully. Harrison's smile was reassuring but realistic. We've learned to channel our competitive instincts toward external threats rather than each other. The Korath attack confirms something we've always believed: there are predators in this galaxy who mistake kindness for weakness. Our job is to make sure they learn otherwise. As if summoned by his words, Captain Chen approached with a data tablet.
Admiral, we've completed our interrogation of the surviving Korath officers. You need to see this.
Harrison reviewed the information, his expression growing darker. Ambassador Zephyr, we need to talk. The Korath attack on your world wasn't an isolated incident. According to their intelligence, they'd been planning simultaneous attacks on 7 other Council worlds. Zephyr felt his blood chill.
7 other worlds?
But, the Council's defensive treaties won't matter if the attacks are coordinated, Chen interjected. The Korath were counting on Council forces being too dispersed and too slow to respond effectively. They planned to conquer 7 worlds before anyone could organize a meaningful defense.
Harrison was already activating his communications device.
But, they made one critical error in their planning. They assumed that Council military doctrine was the only response they needed to prepare for. As the Admiral began coordinating with his fleet commanders, Zephyr realized that the Battle of Kepler Prime had been just the opening move in what could become a galactic war. The Korath Imperium had awakened something they didn't understand, a species whose entire evolutionary history had prepared them for exactly this kind of conflict. Within hours, the human Third Fleet would split into 7 task forces, racing across the galaxy to intercept Korath attacks that hadn't yet begun. What the Korath had planned as a series of easy conquests against weak Council worlds was about to become their introduction to the tactical doctrine of a species that had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare. The galaxy was about to learn that when you accidentally call in Deathworlders, you don't just get help, you get a comprehensive solution to your problem, delivered with the kind of overwhelming competence that only emerges from a species that has survived by being very good at organized violence. And, for the Korath Imperium, that lesson was going to be both final and definitive. 3 days after the Battle of Kepler Prime, the galaxy watched in stunned silence as reports flooded in from 7 different star systems. The human task forces had arrived at each target world mere hours before the planned Korath attacks, turning what should have been surprise assaults into carefully prepared ambushes. On the Council's central command station, Councillor Vexstar stared at the tactical displays showing the complete destruction of the Korath Imperium's invasion fleets. In 72 hours, humanity had effectively ended a threat that could have destabilized the entire galactic order. How many Korath vessels survived across all 7 systems, he asked his military aide, though he already suspected the answer. 12 ships, Counselor. All of them surrendered immediately when they realized they were facing human forces. Vexstar's crystalline carapace dimmed with something approaching awe.
And human casualties? Minimal. For ships damaged, no vessels lost, fewer than 50 personnel injured across the entire operation.
The numbers were incomprehensible by galactic standards. The Korath had deployed over 300 ships across their planned invasions, and the humans had destroyed them with a casualty rate that barely qualified as a skirmish.
Counselor, his aide continued hesitantly, there's something else.
The human fleet commanders are requesting a council session. They say they have important information about the Korath conspiracy. An hour later, Vexstar found himself in the main council chamber as Admiral Harrison's image appeared via quantum communication link. Behind the human admiral, the organized efficiency of a military command center was visible, along with officers from species that hadn't worked together in living memory. Counselors, Harrison began without preamble, our interrogation of captured Korath personnel has revealed information that affects the security of every council member. Harrison gestured, and a holographic star map appeared above the council floor.
Red markers indicated dozens of worlds throughout Council space. The Korath Imperium has been planning what they call the final conquest for over 2 decades. The 7 worlds they attacked were just the first phase. They intended to capture and fortify those positions before launching simultaneous attacks on 43 additional Council worlds. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. 43 worlds represented nearly a quarter of the Council's membership. Councillor Thrain pulsed with alarmed colors. Admiral Harrison, are you saying the Korath plan to conquer half the known galaxy? That was their intention, Harrison confirmed grimly. But more troubling is how they plan to accomplish it. They've been infiltrating Council communication networks for years, monitoring our defensive capabilities and response times. They knew exactly how long it would take for Council forces to respond to each attack. Councillor Yerix of the Peaceful Worlds Alliance leaned forward. How could our security have failed so completely? Because your security was designed for civilized species, Harrison replied bluntly. But Korath aren't civilized. They're apex predators who see diplomacy as weakness and treaties as temporary conveniences. The Admiral's next words sent a chill through the chamber. More importantly, they're not the only ones. Our intelligence teams have identified at least 3 other species with similar expansionist doctrines. The galaxy has predators in it, counselors, and they've been planning to devour you while you debated trade agreements and cultural exchange programs. Councillor Mordak of the Trade Federation spoke with barely controlled panic. What are you suggesting, Admiral? That the Council's entire philosophy of peaceful coexistence is flawed? Harrison's expression softened slightly. Not flawed, Counselor. Noble. But incomplete. Peace only works when everyone agrees to be peaceful. When someone decides to be a predator, you need someone willing and able to be a protector. And you're volunteering humanity for that role? Vexstar asked, though the question carried more curiosity than suspicion. We're volunteering our capabilities in service of Council ideals, Harrison corrected. Humanity believes in what the Council represents: peaceful cooperation between different species, mutual aid, shared prosperity. But we also understand that these ideals have to be protected from those who would destroy them. What followed was the most important debate in galactic history. For 6 hours, representatives from 47 different species argued about humanity's role in the Council, the implications of their military capabilities, and the fundamental question of how to maintain peace in a galaxy that contained predator species. Finally, Councillor Flem of the Scientific Coalition stood to speak. Fellow councillors, we are debating whether to be grateful to the species that just saved millions of our people, prevented a galactic war, and exposed a conspiracy that threatened our entire civilization. I suggest we focus on more practical matters. Such as? Yerix asked. Such as the fact that humanity has demonstrated capabilities we desperately need, Flem replied. They responded to our crisis faster than any Council force could have managed. They fought with tactics we don't understand but can't argue with the results. Most importantly, they did all of this not for conquest or profit, but because they believe in protecting innocent life. Councillor Thrain pulsed with thoughtful colors. What are you proposing? I'm proposing we stop questioning whether humanity is too dangerous to be in the Council, and start asking how we can integrate their protective capabilities with our peaceful ideals. The final vote was closer than expected, 26 species in favor, 17 opposed, and 4 abstentions. But it passed, creating the first formal military alliance in Council history and designating humanity as the Council's primary defensive force. 2 weeks later, Ambassador Zephyr stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt embassy on Kepler Prime, watching human and alien workers collaborate on reconstruction projects. The efficiency was remarkable. Human engineering techniques combined with alien materials science were creating structures stronger and more beautiful than anything either species could have achieved alone. Ambassador Klicken approached with his usual nervous energy. The human Admiral Harrison is here for your scheduled meeting. Zephyr nodded and made his way to the conference room, where he found Harrison reviewing architectural plans with obvious interest. Admiral, Zephyr greeted. I trust you approve of the reconstruction progress? Very much, Harrison replied, setting aside the plans. Your people's architectural sense combined with our structural engineering is producing some impressive results. But I assume you wanted to discuss something more important than building techniques. Zephyr took his seat across from the human admiral. I wanted to understand something, Admiral. your species' response to our crisis was overwhelming. You deployed massive military force, risked your ships and personnel, and fundamentally altered galactic politics, all for people you barely knew. Harrison was quiet for a moment, his weathered features thoughtful.
Ambassador, can I tell you something about human history?
Of course.
We've made every mistake a species can make. We've fought wars over resources we could have shared. We've destroyed environments we could have preserved. We've oppressed people we could have lifted up. Our history is filled with examples of what happens when good people stand by while bad people do terrible things. The Admiral's voice carried the weight of genuine conviction. But we learned from those mistakes. We learned that freedom requires vigilance, that peace requires strength, and that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to hit back harder than they hit you. And now you apply those lessons to galactic politics?
Now we apply those lessons to protecting people who can't protect themselves, Harrison corrected. The Koroth saw your peaceful nature as weakness to be exploited.
We see it as something precious that deserves protection. Zephyr found himself moved by the human sincerity. But surely your people must have concerns about taking on such responsibility? The Council has dozens of member species, thousands of worlds. Harrison's smile was both warm and slightly predatory. Ambassador, you're still not thinking like someone from a death world.
We don't see protecting the Council as a burden, we see it as a purpose.
A purpose? For most of our history, humans fought each other.
Our competitive instincts, our territorial nature, our capacity for organized violence, it all got turned inward. Now we have something better to fight for than resources or ideology.
The Admiral stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mixed human and alien work crews below.
We get to fight for the idea that different species can work together peacefully. We get to fight for the principle that strength should protect the weak rather than exploit them.
We get to fight for the future we all want to build.
He turned back to Zephyr with an expression of quiet satisfaction.
Ambassador, we didn't join the Council despite being from a death world. We joined the Council because we're from a death world.
The galaxy needed protectors, and evolution spent millions of years making us very good at protection. As Harrison left the embassy, Zephyr reflected on how completely his understanding of humanity had changed in just 2 weeks. What the Council had initially seen as a concerning anomaly, a species whose physical capabilities and military prowess seemed excessive for civilized society, had proven to be exactly what the galaxy needed. The Koroth Imperium was gone, their surviving ships now serving as cautionary examples in human military academies. 3 other potential predator species had quietly abandoned their expansionist plans after witnessing what happened to those who threatened Council worlds. The galaxy was more secure than it had been in centuries. But, more than that, the Council itself was changing. The crisis had forced different species to work together in ways that pure diplomacy had never achieved.
Human military coordination was being studied by alien strategists.
Alien technologies were being integrated into human defensive systems.
Cultural exchange programs were being supplemented with mutual defense training.
The humans had done more than answer a distress call, they had catalyzed an evolution in galactic civilization itself. They had shown 47 different species that their peaceful ideals were not incompatible with effective defense, and that sometimes the best way to preserve peace was to be very good at war. 6 months later, when the next crisis emerged, pirates attacking trade routes in the Vega sector, the response was swift and coordinated. Human task forces provided the military muscle while alien specialists handled logistics, intelligence, and post-conflict reconstruction. The pirates were eliminated in 3 days, and the trade routes were secured with permanent defensive stations built using combined human and alien technology. The galaxy had learned that when you accidentally call in Deathworlders, you don't just solve your immediate problem. You discover that some species are made to be protectors, and that the same evolutionary pressures that make a world dangerous to live on can produce people who are very, very good at making the galaxy safe for everyone else. Humanity had found their place in the galactic community, not as conquerors or diplomats, but as the guardians of peace in a universe where peace was always under threat from someone willing to disturb it. And they had never been happier with a job in their entire history.